Hey guys, another one take review, and today I wanted to talk about the Weezer album Everything Will Be Alright in the End. Like a lot of other Weezer fans, I'm completely willing to throw this band under the bus in terms of conversations about bands that fell off hard in terms of quality. And honestly, I didn't care for OK Human, which I know a lot of people thought was their best album since Pinkerton. And I, like a lot of other people, I really didn't like Van Weezer last year either. And generally speaking, I just don't think they've done anything that great since Pinkerton. I hate to rock that stereotype of a Weezer fan, but really, I do think they haven't done anything spectacular since Pinkerton. But I can't say the band have been nothing but hits or misses in the 21st century, and an album like Everything Will Be Alright in the End does prove that. Instrumentally, Everything Will Be Alright in the End is pretty solid by Weezer standards, and I think it's fine. I think it's generally solid enough to, warrant a full listen if you're interested in it. But at the same time, even though the band does kind of shine here, especially on songs like the single Back to the Shack, I do think that there's really not enough here to help you forget that the musical equivalent to falling from a tree and landing on a big rock that was Death the False Metal kind of came before this. That was just such an atrocious album, and I'm still Vietnam War PTSD'd about that record. That is one of the worst albums I've ever heard, and that came directly before this. And I do think you can still kind of hear touches of what they were going for on Death the False Metal on this record, but overall, I do think this is a solid album overall that kind of proves that the band are more than capable of handling themselves instrumentally. The production here was done by the late, great Rick Ocasek. Ocasek, of course, being a member of the Cars, a legendary band that ended up influencing, of course, Weezer in their younger years, and Ocasek also produced Weezer's self-titled Blue album, which is an album that rightfully deserves its legendary status. I know it's kind of over-talked about, over-explained, over-analyzed, but I do think the Blue album deserves that sort of just tons of love that it gets. It is a fantastic album, but that album kind of got a lot of praise because it was a very garagey kind of record. And I mean, there's even a song on there called In the Garage, and I mean, that's not what it was about, but still, it sums up the album overall. Everything Will Be Alright in the End is the opposite end of that spectrum. This is incredibly smooth and just kind of sanded and very just smoothed out overall, and sometimes that works out in Weezer's favor, like on Eulogy for Our Rock Band. However, there are several instances where it feels like they're held down by overwhelmingly clean production. Worst offender of this is probably the song Lonely Girl, which is a pleasant track, hugely held down by just overly done production. But then again, this isn't an album ruining aspect or anything like that. It's just a nitpick from someone who's probably expecting too much from a band that probably has 4.5 albums of good material out of a 16 album discography. Everything Will Be Alright in the End is also frontman River Cuomo's kind of best writing probably since the 90s, since the Blue album and Pinkerton. Mainly the Blue album. The Pinkerton was great, but kind of had some cringeworthy lyrics. So let's just say this was his best songwriting since the Blue album. Being a semi-concept album about personal relationships and Rivers' life, you're bound to get some more personal lyricism as well. A lot of songs on here, like Cleopatra, are very heartfelt and are well written, but at the same time don't feel too kind of unnecessarily whiny about anything or kind of go too deep into River's personal life that kind of you can no longer relate to it anymore. It's the perfect kind of balance between the two. And while Rivers Cuomo is no poet or anything like that, his writing is certainly very strong here. If there is anything worth noting here, it is a kind of sense of attitude that's very rare in Weezer's discography, especially post-Blue album. Obviously, Weezer weren't, Public Enemy or NWA. They never sang about politics or anything super serious like that, or at least not for the most part, but there was a sense of kind of nerdy outcast angst that was heavily woven into some of their earlier works that got lost by the 2000s. This album does bring it back, mainly in the form of instrumentals, but some lyricism here or there, like on the song I've Had It Up to Here. And overall, even though it's not the album's main selling point, it is nice to see a early aspect of Weezer's first couple and easily best albums kind of come back decades into their career. So overall, is Everything Will Be Alright in the End a great album? No, it's good. It's not a stone cold classic in Weezer's discography or anything like that, and it can't even be a classic. It's not even a decade old as I record this, and it's not particularly great either. But what it is a good album that, in comparison to the majority of Weezer's 21st century output, is an absolute godlike Beatles-esque masterpiece. So With that being said, I'm going to give this album 3.5 stars out of 5. It's a good listen, and in all seriousness, I do recommend it. It's a pleasant album. So yeah, 3.5 stars out of 5. And that being said, this is the end of this review, and I'll see you guys in the next one.